The quiet disruption. They won't say it, but you feel a shift in the air when you enter, subtle, yet unmistakable, a conversation that stalls, a smile that stiffens, a gaze that avoids yours just long enough to seem polite, but not long enough to feel honest you. Not wearing anything unusual, you're not being rude, you haven't even spoken, yet the room changes it. It's not anger, not hatred, just unease, like you've disrupted something invisible, something sacred, a fragile performance at first. You question yourself, maybe you said something wrong, maybe you're reading into things, but it keeps happening over and over. Different places, different people, same unspoken tension. Eventually, you start to see it for what it is. It's not what you're doing, it's what you're being. And what you are being is real. In a world addicted to performance, your authenticity becomes disruptive. You see the game, but you don't play it. You walk in, and your presence speaks before your voice ever can. It whispers something dangerous. I see you. Not just the smiles, not just the polite words, but what's underneath. The masks, the fear, the hidden shame that most spend a lifetime keeping buried. You don't expose it with cruelty, you don't call it out, but your very existence makes it impossible to ignore, like a mirror people didn't ask for, but can't look away from, and so they retreat or gossip or dismiss you as too much, not because you're wrong, but because you make them feel things they aren't ready to feel. This isn't mysticism, it's not ego, it's not superiority, it's psychology, energy, trauma. It's the subconscious reacting to what it can't quite name, but has always feared. What you're feeling is the invisible fallout of spiritual awakening. When you become aware of yourself, truly aware, you begin to radiate a different frequency. A resonance not shaped by trends, approval, or identity roles. You've seen your own darkness, made peace with it, and now your presence quietly reminds others of their own. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But there's something even more terrifying: encountering someone who already has. The world is not reacting to you, it's reacting to what you reveal in them. This is the quiet disruption. The silent earthquake that begins not with sound, but with presence. And the truth is, awakening doesn't make life easier, it makes it more honest, and honesty is rarely welcome in a world built on illusion. What spiritual awakening really means. Most people think of spiritual awakening as a beautiful experience, a kind of cosmic bliss, a moment of inner peace, accompanied by soft music and sunlight pouring in through the window. But the reality is far more brutal. Awakening isn't a celebration. It's a funeral, the death of everything you thought you were, the collapse of every belief, identity, and illusion you once clung to for safety. It begins not with light, but with darkness, a creeping sense that something is wrong, not just with the world, but with you, the roles you've played, the truths you've avoided, the masks you've worn for so long you forgot they weren't your face. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the psychological journey of becoming a whole person, not a better version, but a more authentic one. It's not about ascending to something new, it's about descending into what has always been there, buried beneath the noise. Individuation requires the integration of your shadow, the parts of yourself you deny, reject, or project onto others. The anger, the fear, the jealousy, the pain, all the uncomfortable truths that polite society taught you to suppress in favor of being likable, agreeable, and numb. And so, awakening feels like a breakdown because in many ways it is. You lose friends. You question your purpose. You can't participate in the small talk, the gossip, the rituals of distraction. You start noticing things others ignore, patterns, manipulations, the artificial scaffolding that props up everyday reality. It doesn't feel empowering, it feels destabilizing. You begin to see how much of your life was built on compliance, how many of your values weren't yours, how many of your choices were made from fear. You stop performing and start observing, and what you see is often unbearable. That unbearable truth is the beginning of real clarity. Awakening doesn't give you the answers, it removes the lies, and without those lies, you are left raw, vulnerable, and profoundly alone. Not everyone makes it through this stage. Many turn back. They reach for distraction, for conformity, for any narrative that will dull the sharp edge of seeing too clearly. But for those who endure, something else emerges, not peace but presence, not comfort but clarity, not validation but inner alignment. You stop chasing who you're supposed to be, and instead, you begin to remember who you already are. But make no mistake, awakening does not make you special. It makes you accountable. You no longer have the luxury of ignorance. You see the games, the projections, the self-deceptions, and you can't unsee them. And that knowledge demands something of you. Honesty. Even when it costs you everything. This is why true awakening is rare. Because it doesn't fit into the consumer model of enlightenment. It can't be bought, branded, or sold. It's not aesthetically pleasing. It's psychologically shattering. And yet, in that shattering, there's a strange kind of freedom. The freedom of no longer needing to pretend. The freedom of being able to sit in your own silence without fear. The truth is, awakening doesn't make you peaceful. It makes you truthful. And truth, in a world addicted to illusion, is always perceived as a threat. Sign 1 to 3. The social fallout of inner clarity. There are moments when you say nothing, do nothing, yet the atmosphere shifts the second you enter the room. It's not hostility, it's something subtler. A tension, a guardedness, a barely perceptible tightening of social fabric. As if your presence has threatened an invisible agreement. Everyone else is trying to maintain. People flinch at you, and not physically, but emotionally. You notice the change in body language. Eyes avert, smiles tighten. Their tone becomes cautious. Not because you've said anything wrong, but because you haven't said anything at all. You've simply arrived, and that was enough to make others recalibrate. They begin to wonder, why? This isn't charisma. It's not some aura of dominance or mystique. It's something far more threatening to the collective psyche. Clarity. Bess. When you begin to wake up, truly wake up, you begin to emit a kind of quiet truth that the unconscious mind in others picks up instantly without knowing why. They feel exposed in your presence. Their own unresolved issues begin to surface, not because you're judging them, but because your energy mirrors what they've spent years avoiding. This is the first sign of spiritual awakening. Social fallout. You reflect what others repress, and the deeper your self-awareness grows, the more disruptive that reflection becomes. The second sign emerges from this. You change the emotional climate of a room without trying. You walk in, and suddenly the vibe shifts. Conversations grow shallow. People look over their shoulder more. Something about your groundedness, your stillness, or your silence seems to challenge the collective emotional script everyone is subconsciously following. Your presence doesn't match the tempo of avoidance, distraction, or performance, and that discrepancy breaks the illusion. It's as if you've entered a theater mid-scene without a costume, reminding the actors that they're acting. This disruption isn't loud. It's not confrontational. It's internal. People feel it in their chest, in their gut, a quiet confrontation with something they weren't prepared to face. And so, to protect themselves, they invent explanations for what they're feeling, which leads us to the third sign. You're labeled as too much, too deep, or too intense. It's rarely said directly. It's implied in tone, in body language, in the way people disengage or change the subject. When your words start touching something real, you might be sharing a personal insight, speaking gently about something that matters to you, but instead of openness, you meet resistance, a forced smile, a sudden discomfort, a deflection. You didn't raise your voice, you didn't argue. All you did was introduce truth into a space where illusion was more convenient, and this is the core of it. People don't fear you, they fear what you represent: an interruption, a question mark in a world addicted to certainty, a signal that something isn't quite as stable or righteous or innocent as they thought in a society where performance is the norm. Truth feels like violence, so the reaction is predictable. They withdraw, they misinterpret, they gossip, not out of malice, but out of defense. Your presence has forced a subconscious decision. Either look inward or blame outward. Most choose the latter, and this is the quiet tragedy of awakening. Not that you are rejected for being wrong, but that you are distanced for being right too soon. Your clarity became confrontation without you speaking a word. You became a mirror in a house of shadows. You don't carry a weapon, you carry awareness, and for many, that's the most dangerous thing you could possibly hold. Sign 4 to 6. You starve in shallow spaces. You sit at a table surrounded by laughter, conversation, noise. The questions float through the air like scripted lines. How's work? Did you see the game? Can you believe the weather? And yet, you feel it, the hollowness behind the words. The performative rhythm of people who are speaking, not to connect, but to avoid silence. For most, this is comfort. For you, it's suffocation. This is the 4th sign. Small talk feels physically draining, not because you think you're above it, but because your nervous system rebels against the artificial. Your body knows when the words aren't real, when the energy doesn't match the face, when the room is full, but the souls are missing. You nod, you smile, you answer the questions, but it feels like swimming in shallow water when you're built for the ocean. You want to dive to explore, but every attempt at depth is met with blank stares, nervous laughter, or a quick shift back to the surface. And so you withdraw, but that withdrawal doesn't come without consequence, because here's the paradox of the awakened. You attract vulnerability, but rarely experience true connection. That's the 5th sign. People come to you to unload, but not to understand you. Strangers tell you their secrets. Friends call you at their lowest. You've become the container for others' pain. They say things like, "I don't know why I'm telling you this," and then vanish once the emotional storm has passed. It's not manipulation, it's something deeper. Carl Jung described the archetype of the wounded healer, someone who, through their own suffering, becomes a vessel for others. Your presence feels safe, non-judgmental, deep, but this safety comes at a cost, because when they leave, you're left carrying the emotional residue. You process their grief, their fear, their trauma without reciprocity. You were never asked how you were doing, never given space for your truth, and over time, this becomes its own kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being misunderstood while surrounded by people, which leads to the 6th sign. You crave solitude, but feel spiritually starved in crowds. You isolate, not to escape people, but to protect your own energy. You'd rather be alone with your thoughts than among people who can't see you. It's not antisocial behavior, it's spiritual survival. But the craving for solitude doesn't mean you don't long for connection. You do deeply. It's just that the kind of connection you seek, real, raw, unfiltered, is rare, and in its absence, even social settings feel like deserts. You become the observer in the room, the one who watches rather than speaks, who listens rather than performs. And this only deepens the sense of alienation, because in a world that rewards visibility, silence is often mistaken for weakness, or worse, superiority. What they don't see is the depth behind that silence, the restraint, the complexity. What they don't realize is that your presence carries a gravity most can't sit with for long. This is the spiritual burden of depth in a shallow world. You are built for intimacy, not performance, for meaning, not distraction, for truth, not convenience. And when those needs go unmet, you feel it in your bones, a kind of existential hunger, a longing for the kind of connection that feels like home, not because it's familiar, but because it's honest. But honesty is rare, and until you find it, you learn to live with the ache of authenticity. You learn to starve quietly, even while the world calls it being picky, too sensitive, or too intense. What they call too much is just your refusal to live on spiritual crumbs. Sign 7 to 9. You break the scripts. You don't walk into a room trying to start a revolution. You don't set out to challenge people, but somehow, that's what keeps happening. You speak, and the air tightens, not because you're loud or combative, but because your questions land where people are most uncertain. That's the 7th sign. You challenge assumptions without trying. It's not that you argue, it's that you don't automatically agree. when someone says something you don't resonate with. You pause. You think you probe gently, but honestly, and that moment of pause breaks something invisible, because most conversations aren't built on truth. They're built on mutual compliance. You're expected to nod, smile, move on, but you don't, and that small act of thinking critically, of asking why, can feel like a threat to those who've never questioned the script they were handed. A simple question like, "How do you know that's true?" can provoke defensiveness, because most people don't realize how deeply they've outsourced their beliefs. To culture, to family, to media, to tradition, you didn't bring conflict, you just brought awareness, and awareness is disruptive. This disruption doesn't stop at ideas. It extends to people, which leads to the 8th sign. You trigger authority figures, even without rebel lens. You've seen it. The manager who gets nervous when you speak, the teacher who subtly condescends, the family elder who dismisses you with a smile too sharp to be warm. These figures aren't reacting to your behavior. They're reacting to your independence. You don't submit the way others do. You don't flatter egos. You don't seek approval. You're respectful, but sovereign, and in systems built on hierarchy. Sovereignty is deeply unsettling. Carl Jung wrote about archetypes, universal patterns of human behavior. When you embody the energy of someone who is self-possessed, aligned, unafraid to think independently, you trigger the archetype of the disruptor, not because you want to destroy, but because your very presence suggests an alternative to control. That's threatening, especially to those whose identity is wrapped in authorities. Oh, they respond with subtle hostility. Passive aggression rules, suddenly. Enforced more strictly, you are seen not as cooperative, but as unpredictable, and in bureaucratic systems, unpredictability is treated as danger. And here comes the 9th sign. You get miscast as the villain in other stories. You've felt it. The moment someone starts to pull away, a friend, a colleague, a partner, they rewrite the narrative, casting you not as the one who offered clarity or care, but as the cold one, the arrogant one, the one who made them feel less than. Not because you insulted them, but because your presence illuminated a truth they weren't ready to hold. This is projection at work, a fundamental defense mechanism of the human psyche. When someone encounters a person who unknowingly reflects their hidden shame, they often can't face it directly, so they relocate it onto you suddenly. Your boundaries become selfishness, your honesty becomes aggression, your solitude becomes rejection. They don't see you. They see the parts of themselves they are running from, and name you the threat. The role of the villain is convenient. It restores order in their story. It gives them a reason not to change, and so, without meaning to, without trying to disrupt, or confront, or rebel, you find yourself outside the script, misunderstood, miscast, even resented. But here's the truth. The awakened don't fit into roles. You've stopped playing the character. They remember, and the moment you step out of the script, you challenge the illusion of the entire stage. And in a world where the play matters more than the truth, the one who refuses to act becomes the antagonist. Sign 10 to 12. You reflect a world they fear. There's a feeling you've carried for as long as you can remember, not loneliness in the traditional sense, but something deeper, a kind of exile, as if you were born slightly out of sync with the world around you. That's the 10th sign. You feel like you were born not of this world. You don't relate to what others celebrate. You've never felt at home in large crowds, in loud celebrations, in the rituals that society calls normal. It's not judgment, it's dissonance. Their rhythm doesn't match your pulse. Their values don't stir your soul. You see meaning where others see entertainment. You feel urgency where others seek distraction. It's as if you were sent here to remember something everyone else forgot, a truth buried beneath the noise. And so, even when you're surrounded by people, you often feel alone, not physically but existentially, and yet your presence draws people in. That's the 11th sign. You magnetize strangers, especially the broken or lost. It happens at bus stops, coffee shops, train stations. A stranger sits beside you and begins to speak, not casually, but vulnerably. They tell you stories they haven't told anyone, They confess wounds still bleeding. They look at you and say, "I don't know why I'm telling you this, but you do know something in you emits safety, a resonance of understanding, not because your life is perfect, but because your soul has depth. You've suffered, faced yourself, walked through your own darkness, and survived." People can feel that, especially those who are hurting. Your energy becomes a lighthouse for the emotionally shipwrecked. But here's the paradox. While you draw them in, you rarely feel truly seen. You listen, you hold space, you witness the raw humanity in others. But when the conversation ends, they often vanish, as if your role was not to be known, but to be used unconsciously as a mirror, a momentary encounter with their own soul seen through yours. And that brings us to the 12th and final sign. You feel both sacred and alone, like a spiritual exile there. A weight to your awareness, a gravity to your presence, not because you try to carry it, but because it clings to you. You see too much, feel too deeply, and that depth, while powerful, creates distance. People sense something in you that they can't quite name, but they don't trust it. Not because it's dark, but because it's real. You walk among others, but rarely with them. You move through conversations where nothing true is said. You smile, but your soul stays quiet. You love, but you know most people fall in love with the version of you they want, not the one you really are. Carl Jung once described the awakened individual as a living symbol, someone who has stepped outside the collective myth and now reflects back what the tribe refuses to see. That reflection is powerful. It's spiritual, but it's also isolating, because people don't always want mirrors. They want comfort, they want performance, and when you refuse to play along, when you simply are whole, aware, unfiltered, you become a kind of silent threat, not by action, by existence. And so, you learn to live in this liminal space, between connection and solitude, between being needed and being misunderstood. You become both medicine and exile, healer and heretic, sacred and unseen. It's not a punishment, it's a path few walk. Not because it's hidden, but because it's hard. It strips you of illusion. It isolates you from the herd, but it also gives you something rare: clarity, integrity, alignment. And perhaps that's why you were born different, not to belong, but to remind the world that there's more to see. Why real awakening is rare and feared. The world celebrates the idea of awakening, but not the reality of it. It praises clarity. As long as it doesn't challenge the comfortable, it rewards truth. As long as it doesn't disrupt the narrative, it applauds individuality. As long as it still conforms to the structure. But real awakening doesn't conform, it contradicts. And contradiction is dangerous in a world addicted to control. Most people don't realize how much they've built their lives around illusions: identity, status, religion, patriotism, morality. Most of it is inherited, not discovered. The self is shaped through repetition, conditioning, approval. You're told who you are long before you get the chance to ask. That's the silent contract. Obey the script, and you will be accepted. But awakening breaks the script. You start to see how much of your belief system wasn't yours to begin with. You question what others accept without hesitation. You begin to hear the static behind their certainty, the cracks in the stories they defend, not because they're true, but because they're familiar. And this is where the resistance begins. Carl Jung called it ego resistance, the defense mechanism that activates when truth begins to unravel the persona. The ego doesn't want change, it wants safety, and awakening demands the opposite: the death of safety in exchange for the birth of reality. This resistance doesn't only live in individuals, it lives in culture, it lives in media. It lives in institutions that rely on mass compliance. Modern systems are not designed to cultivate awakening, they are built to discourage it. School teaches answers, not questions. Media rewards outrage, not introspection. Politics thrives on division, not unity. Economics runs on fear, not fulfillment. An awakened individual is not easily manipulated, not easily sold to, not easily divided. That makes you a problem, not because you're violent, but because you're free, and freedom, real psychological freedom, is the one thing mass culture cannot fully control. History remembers the awakened, but rarely kindly. Socrates was poisoned, Galileo was condemned, Martin Luther King was assassinated, Malcolm X was silenced, Julian Assange is in exile, Edward Snowden lives in forced isolation. These weren't saints or infallible heroes. They were human beings who saw too much and said too much. And the system didn't reward them, it rejected them, not for lying but for seeing. This is the reality. The more awake you become, the more alone you may feel, because to wake up is to stop participating in the collective sleepwalk. It's to see propaganda where others see patriotism, to see control where others see structure, to see programming where others see normalcy. You become inconvenient. You start asking questions no one wants to answer. You become the voice that says, "This doesn't feel right," when everyone else has agreed to pretend. And yet, that's why you must keep going. Because real awakening is not rebellion for the sake of ego. It's resistance in the name of integrity. It's not the fight against society, it's the defense of the soul. You were not meant to fit into this world's machinery. You were meant to remind it that there is something more. Awakening is rare because truth is rare, and truth is rare because truth is feared. But fear has never been a worthy reason to stop, not when the cost of silence is your own becoming. Conclusion: the loneliness of light. There comes a moment in every awakened life when you ask yourself the question no one else can answer: why does this path feel so lonely? You've tried to fit in, to soften your edges, to make your thoughts more palatable. You've edited your truth to protect the comfort of others. You've shrunk yourself to remain in spaces you've already outgrown, and still there's that quiet ache, that feeling of being too much for the world you live in, and yet not enough for the one you long for. But what if this isn't failure? What if it's a sign that you are evolving, and the world simply hasn't caught up yet? Spiritual awakening is not a popularity contest. It's not about being liked, it's about becoming real. And reality is often uncomfortable, especially for those still living behind masks. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But that privilege has a price, and the price is distance, because becoming who you truly are requires letting go of who you were told to be. It means outgrowing relationships built on performance. It means losing people who only recognize the version of you that stayed silent. It means walking away from systems that profit from your sleep. And yes, it means solitude, but not the empty solitude of isolation. The sacred solitude of clarity. You are not here to be digestible, you are here to be whole. You are not here to be tolerated, you are here to reflect truth, and truth, in a world addicted to illusion, will always feel like rebellion. That's why they call you too intense, too emotional, too serious, too sensitive, too strange. But what they really mean is, you make me feel things I'm not ready to feel. You remind people of their forgotten depth. You shine light into places others have kept dark. You ask questions that don't have easy answers, and for that, you will be misunderstood, not because you are broken, but because you are ahead. You were never meant to blend in, you were meant to awaken. And awakening is not a single moment. It's a series of quiet choices to keep seeing when others close their eyes, to keep speaking when silence is safer, to keep loving when the world teaches fear. You walk a path few choose, not because they can't, but because they won't. But still, you walk not for applause, not for status, but because something inside you refuses to sleep again. Something inside you has tasted truth and cannot return to denial. And yes, this will make you lonely, but never mistake that loneliness for failure. It's not rejection, it's refinement. The world is not pushing you out. It's making space for what you were always meant to become: a signal, a mirror, a catalyst. So the next time someone says you're too much, too strange, too deep, remember this: you are not too much, you are simply awake, and in a world that is still asleep. That is not a weakness, it is a rare kind of strength. You do not need to apologize for the light you carry, just keep walking, because somewhere, in the quiet, others are waking up too, and when they do, they'll be looking for someone like you, to remind them that they are not alone. If you found this exploration of Stoicism inspiring, please like the video, subscribe to the channel for more philosophical insights, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps us continue to bring you content that enriches your life. Thank you for watching.